Hey everyone, Jordan Connect here again with another episode of Embrace the Chase, and we're just kicking this year off right. Episode 49, we have Thad Roberts on tonight, which I'm very pumped and excited about. For those of you that don't know Thad, he's a TEDx speaker. He's the author of Einstein's Intuition, Visualizing Nature in 11 Dimensions. He's also a famous theoretical physicist, and I love following him on Facebook. You guys should definitely do it as well because he's a renowned adventure photographer. He takes some of the coolest pictures and just off camera told me an incredible story of Machu Picchu. But Thad, I'm really excited to have you on. Is there anything I missed, sir, that you'd like to add?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. So if you could do us a favor to start us from the very beginning, what kind of originally got you interested in physics, and then what eventually led to you kind of coming up with the 11 dimensions?
Oh, well, the beginning was kind of laying in the grass, looking up, feeling very out of place in this world, and looking at the stars, and I knew nothing about them, nothing at all. I didn't even know where the North Star was. And all I could do was romanticize about living somewhere else, right? But the more real I wanted that to be, the more I realized I need to understand what that even means. Like, where are these other places? What's different over there? What's the same over there? And this opened up like a lot of science questions. And I was really young, but they became very personal science questions. And from then on, all the science questions or philosophical questions became very personal for me, and I like to chase them. Not that I have answers to all of them, but it's really fun to own the question and then be on the quest personally.
I like it. I love it. So then, for those of you watching at home right now, or you're watching live, you're watching replay, I highly suggest going ahead and click the link after this, of course, and go watch his entire TEDx talk. But Thad, I'd like you to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what exactly the 11 dimensions are, because my understanding of everything, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to go through this real brief because you're the expert, not me, is obviously 3D space most people understand, but the fourth dimensional space is kind of like is time, of course. So if we are 3D beings visualizing a fourth dimensional entity per se, basically the only way I can comprehend it is that they can control their time, so make themselves old, young, kind of progress through at whatever rate they want. That's my understanding of it. And then the fifth dimension is that we can travel to any parallel universes that are in the same coordinates. The sixth dimension being travel to any of those same coordinate dimensions in time. And then the seventh is any other coordinated dimensions. Eighth is all those dimensions in time as well. And then the ninth dimension is to kind of understand their whole histories. Is that right? Am I even coming close to understanding all that? Or am I just way off base?
You completely lost me on that. Okay, let's start with this. The way we picture the world in our head right now, right? Just take the average person. I'm gonna go with what I think you're thinking the world is. Now imagine the entire universe, and now delete from all the things in the universe everything you can identify, right? All the planets, all the stars, all the matter, all the light. Keep removing anything you can name. All right. Now, what's left?
Atoms? I don't know, but I can name that. So
now delete the atoms, right? So you get rid of all the things, all the material stuff, all the energy and matter, any name you can attach to it. The only thing that would be left, because you're still supposed to have a universe of something, right? It just doesn't have any things in it, would be just the vacuum. Okay, now if you try to say, all right, well, I want to delete the vacuum, then you could have the question, if you delete the vacuum, do you still have a universe? Or did you delete the universe in that process? Okay, and you can debate, I'm not going to take a side on that. But the point is, when you have just the vacuum, and that's all that's left, what are the properties of the vacuum? See, a lot of times we usually talk about properties of things that are real in their relative positions in the vacuum, right? But we only talk about the properties of the other things and not the properties of the space, not properties of the vacuum itself. Okay, so right now, what you're probably imagining is what we call Euclidean space. It's this XYZ grid that you had in high school and college, right? It's just evenly spaced hash marks, but they're not really there. The lines don't exist there. You just use them as a representation. You could zoom in more and more and divide the ruler into smaller and smaller marks, but you can go in forever. Or you could go out forever if we assume that the universe is infinite in size, okay? But you can certainly go in forever. And another quality would be that it didn't matter where you started, those rule hash marks are the same everywhere, right? The property of this space looks the same everywhere, and every direction. So you can turn and it looks the same. The space is just the same everywhere and on every scale. Okay, that's the Euclidean assumption. And then when you have that universe, you put things in position, like you put a planet here and have it moving. You put all these different atoms together a certain way, and we build things from that. But that's how we think of our universe, as a stage that provides position, but Euclidean position, and it's continuous. It continues to be connected. All right. Well, what we're doing is challenging, and not just me. It's a huge camp. In fact, we've already gone away from Euclidean space. All of physicists have gone away from Euclidean space. The question is, what is the actual space? What are the foundational elements, ingredients of the universe? Well, I'm in the camp that explores the idea that the vacuum itself is a fluid medium, kind of like air, okay, that's made up of molecules, atoms, or what we call quanta. Quanta just means a fundamental unit of something. So you take a lot of them and you get a lot of interactions that have properties and so on. And it's a special kind of fluid called a superfluid. Okay, and this will be answering all the other dimensions. I'm just giving the background for it. A difference between a regular fluid and a superfluid. We have a lot of visceral experience in our everyday life from regular fluids. Like say you filled up a bucket a third of the way full of water, and you suspend the bucket from a rope or a tree, right? And you twist up the bucket nice and slow, hold it twisted until the water is not moving, and then let go. So as the bucket's untwisting, it's kind of going down a little bit, but it's going to speed up faster and faster and faster. Now, the surface of the water, or all the bulk of the water in there, what does it do over time? The first instant, the bucket starts to rotate, but the fluid stays still. But then because of friction from the walls, as the walls go faster and faster, they start to drag some of this fluid more and more. And you see the fluid goes faster and faster and faster around the center, right? And climbs up the walls. That makes sense? That's clear in your head?
Yeah.
Okay. Regular fluids do this. They have internal viscosity. The viscosity is like the internal friction, okay? So that the wall gets to drag the fluid. If the wall couldn't drag the fluid because there was no friction between them, then you wouldn't get to rotate the fluid at all, even if you rotated the bucket. Okay, so the way you can tell, if I took a picture of this event, you could tell me if the water was rotating or not rotating based on the shape of the surface of the water, right? If it's concave, you're like, yeah, right, then it was rotating. If it was flat, then no, right, then it wasn't rotating. So there's a literal visual difference between something that's rotating or not, or accelerating or not. So rotation is a form of acceleration. And superfluid also is different. Okay, in the superfluid case, if we put it in the bucket, try to rotate, it would never climb the walls. Okay, it would never be rotating that way. Instead, the rotational energy that you're putting into the system manifests in a very weird way for us because it's not familiar to us. It pops up in these internal vortices, so little 3D vortices all throughout the fluid, all arranged in the same direction, okay? And they only exist on certain sizes and quantized sizes. So you get size 1, the smallest one, and then the next size up from that, and so on. But there's no sizes in between that are stable. So as you give more energy, it all just shows up inside, but the bulk isn't rotating, just the little vortices inside rotate, okay? All right, so that's enough of a start because we want to move through this. Now, what's the difference between assuming that the vacuum is this smooth grid that doesn't do anything, it doesn't interact with the stuff, it just provides place for the stuff to exist, versus the idea that the universe is just the vacuum itself, and the vacuum is a superfluid? Well, here's the really cool part for me. If the universe was the first case, if it was Euclidean, then you have to describe all the stuff separate from the vacuum. Meaning we have to say, okay, we take on as assumption that the vacuum exists. We don't know why, but it's there. Now we take on the assumption that all the fundamental particles of matter exist. We don't know why, but they're there. And from that we can build, or then we get all the photons and the different kind of interactions and so on. But we have a lot of fundamental parts or ingredients to our world that we build the world from. And it's a smaller number now because we've done a lot of science. We've broken down that all atoms come from subatomic particles, so it's got this smaller number and so on, right? But we still have a lot of assumptions. In the other camp, when we say that the vacuum itself is a superfluid, we don't have to then say, and on top of the superfluid, there's the other particles. Instead, what we do is say, hey, the vortices that are allowed to form in the superfluid itself are those particles. So it's just the different kinds of waves that are allowed to exist in the superfluid vacuum that account for all the phonon interactions, all the light, and all the matter that exists. and everything from there. So we start with one description of what things are, and the dynamics allowed in that description give us all the properties we were trying to explain, which means if it's right, and you never know if you're right in science, but if the model is right, it counts as an answer that's completely intuitive and visceral. So you could ask me, what are these things? What are these objects? And I can tell you what atoms they're made out of. And you can say, well, why are atoms there? What are they made out of? And I can tell you the subatomic particles. And then you can ask me again, and I can say, oh, those subatomic particles are vortices in the vacuum. And your why question has traced all the way down to the one fundamental thing that needs to be explained. Now you could still say, why is the vacuum there? Why does it exist? And say, we don't know the model. That's as far as the model goes, but it goes all the way to the bottom, right? And I find that really exciting. So why 11 dimensions? Well, before we had 3 dimensions that give you 3 different positions in space, right? 3 different coordinates to identify a single position in space, I should say. So you got left and right, back and forward, up and down, or we can say X, Y, and Z, right? And then you also have time, because something can be holding still in X, Y, and Z and still moving through time, right? Like over every second, it's now later in time. You don't see that motion in space, but it still moves through time. So we have 4 different coordinates that describe changes of position, either space or in time. But if space were Euclidean, that's all there would be. You couldn't change in any other way, because any change would imply just a change in one of those 4 or more than one of those 4. All right, well, if the vacuum is broken up into pieces, if you zoomed in enough on a scale to where you could see this quantization, and all these pieces are moving around, bumping into each other like we imagine air molecules doing, right? They're elastically bouncing off each other. If you freeze frame, at some point some are colliding, some other ones there's a big gap between them, right? So it's not all uniform. If that's the case, then each quanta represents a fundamental, smallest thing we can talk about, smallest location we can talk about in the vacuum. Okay, so if I want to say that this object, which happens to be a really tiny object, exists in a certain place in the vacuum, if it's really, really, really small, the most accurate it could be is tell you exactly which quanta it's occupying right then. All right, but the arrangement of those quanta is a fluid thing. It changes over time, right? So the state of the vacuum is not a constant Euclidean story. It's not a boring story. It's a very interactive story. All right, so now we have this descriptor, a fundamental descriptor of reality that attaches to the vacuum, and in quantum mechanics we call it like a state vector. It's here's the state of the vacuum is the arrangement of all the quanta at this moment. All right, but if the only thing you knew were how they're arranged relative to each other, then you wouldn't know how they're going to move the next moment, because I just gave you a freeze frame snapshot picture, but I also didn't give you all the information from that picture. I just told you that these 3 are lined up in this, one's in the middle of the other ones. Okay, but I don't know how they're moving, and I also don't know how far they're spaced apart, because I mentioned nothing about the medium that they're moving in. All right, so the state vector becomes a blurred out representation of all the possible ways they could be arranged, given that you're missing some of the information. All right, so in quantum mechanics, it's all based on this. We have a state vector. When we make a measurement, it collapses, so you get an actual state instead of this blurred out state. Well, in this picture, instead what we're saying is actually with the other dimensions in the picture, you started out with an exact state and you end up with an exact state, and it's deterministically evolving in between them the entire time because the other information existed in the other dimensions. What are those other dimensions? Well, since we broke up the vacuum, we have a location in space, and you build all these collections of these locations, and they fill out the X, Y, Z coordinates that you were used to talking about. All right, but each location itself, each quanta has volume, right? But that volume doesn't count as volume in XYZ, because the volume in XYZ must be filled out by taking a collection of these things. So a single one doesn't even reference a change in position in that collection. But there is a change of position in something. It's in that volume. So we have to define that as a separate kind of volume, a separate kind of spatial coordinates. So those 3 dimensions inside that volume represent a completely unique kind of volume, or spatial dimensions. We call them interspatial dimensions. So something can move around. I mean, you can imagine in your head something being inside there moving around, and it's not moving from this one to this one. It doesn't change its position in space. It just changes its position inside this individual bubble. Okay, and you have the volume between the quanta. Say they're not colliding right now, right? As they move through that volume, the superspatial volume, they also get to change their coordinates and mix things up. So then we, of course, let's repeat that the collection of all the quanta fill out the volume of space. So we have 3 unique kinds of volume, and each volume has 3 dimensions. So that's 9 spatial dimensions. So now I need, if nothing's moving, and I would try to describe this collection of all the quanta that build the vacuum of space, I now need 9 coordinates to tell you a precise position of anything. Okay, so that's 9 spatial dimensions. Time is a descriptor that belongs to each location in space. So each quanta resonates. Say they collided, and now this one's flying off this way. And as it's doing it, it's resonating because it's elastic, so it's just doing this natural resonation. Well, the number of free resonations that each quanta gets, meaning while it's not colliding, ticks off more time that it experiences. If you're in a region that happens to be really dense, so all the vacuum is really dense over here, so they're real close to each other and they're all slamming into each other all the time, versus way over here, they're much more spaced apart and they're not slamming in as much, then the signature of time will be different. Over here, you get less time because they're hitting each other all the time. They don't get these free resonations. And over here, they get way more free resonations, so they experience more time. Which means now you're going to have regions in space where you can move from one region to the next and have less and less time, like, say, a black hole. As you approach a black hole, time gets squeezed out and no time happens at a black hole. Okay, so we get a lot of interesting characteristics that automatically pop in for free. You like that one?
Yeah, just like the whole black hole thing just blew my mind.
Good.
I'm starting to picture this a lot easier now. The volume phrase you used is what kind of helped connect all the dots.
Good. It's a really simple picture, actually. Before I go into that, we have a second dimension of time. So the first dimension of time just tracks how much each location gets to experience ticks of time because they're freely resonating. And it can be different. In one region, you can have a whole bunch of them that aren't getting hardly any. In another region, they're getting a lot more compared to that one. But if it's uniform density, then you expect on average, take a larger measure of, say, 1,000 ticks in time, pretty much everybody else will also have 1,000 plus or minus 10 ticks of time. They'll be real close to the same, right? Okay, the other dimension of time is the one that tracks motion through superspace. So as this thing's flying through here, or flying through superspace between collisions, it can be resonating, but it's also moving, right? So the resonations and the motion aren't necessarily connected. The resonation is like this constant thing while they're not interacting, but it can be moving real slow or it can be moving really fast. And velocity is just a change in position over a change in time. So that reference in time would be the more fundamental kind of time to reference in this model, the one that's easier to visualize in your head. And the other one, this resonation here is less fundamental because you're used to referencing time as a ticker of how things change, right? Okay, so that's enough of that because it'll get more complicated if I try to go more detail, but I think that's a general picture.
Well then, so crazy question, and please correct me if I'm way off base on this. So if our universe is a spatial, like you were saying, flying through time, the way I'm understanding it is like almost like a ball, kind of like your TEDx video. If that collides with another universe, is that essentially maybe the Big Bang? Am I understanding that properly?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know how you jumped to that so fast, but good job.
Okay. That makes way more sense now, because I'm like, well, hold on now. If it's a ball, then what's the ball? So you're saying that quantified space is a universe.
Yeah, I don't know how you actually made that connection because I don't think I said enough for you to do that yet, but you did, so great. So the collection of all the quanta, so a single quanta is just a piece of space, right? But if you take the whole collection, eventually that whole collection from an exterior point of view could look like another quanta, right? And then you can take a collection of those, so now you got a whole universe that from an exterior point of view just represents a single quanta in another larger scale universe and so on. So the picture becomes this like a fractal. Do you know the word fractal?
I don't know the definition.
It's a self-similar representation that goes up on scale, up and down. Approximation of a fractal. Say you take a maple leaf, and you just take the one leaf off at the stem, and you look at it, and you got the stem, and you have the shape of the leaf, and you walk away from the tree until you realize, oh my God, the leaf kind of resembles the tree, right? You have the thing made up of the thing, but they have the same sort of geometry, same sort of structure. Now, it's not exact, but there are systems in the universe, in reality, that are really good approximations of being fractals. And if the vacuum is actually a superfluid, which means zero viscosity, then it's free from parameters that get rid of the inconsistencies of being a perfect fractal. In fact, it gets to be a perfect fractal. So that the connection you made, that if we go out another scale and we have two of these universes that look like quanta now, slam into each other, then yeah, they reorder their internal constituents and reset as it rebounds off. It's like the Big Bang from the internal perspective.
Well, then, question, how would you be able to travel inter-universally without them colliding into each other? Is there even a way for a three-dimensional being like ourselves to get there?
I doubt it, that it's possible for us as if we, I mean, you get really esoteric at that point about, okay, we have to make some way to make it so we're not three-dimensional. If you're trapped as being a three-dimensional being, then you're not going to make it out of the medium that allows you to be a three-dimensional being, right? So we need the vacuum. So I don't know how we're going to keep ourselves existing without the vacuum, because the atoms won't exist without it. It's like the whirlpool can't exist without the lake, right, or the river. You need the medium. So, yeah.
That's so trippy. You're going to have me thinking about this for months. So let's go on and transition out of this for the sake of your time. What are your current projects into 2018 and into beyond? Are you writing another book right now, or what's kind of going on with you?
Well, I'm still doing the science stuff, but I also, it's been a big goal ever since I got out of prison to try to make a little social commentary that could make an impact on how people are willing to open up to the plight of others. Maybe that's the way to say it. Right. So I feel like I wrote a book basically about jail, and I'm going to follow it up with one in prison from my experience. And the point of writing this book for me was, I feel like a lot of people who would identify with me, either for cultural or status reasons, like economic status reasons, those are the people who are least likely to have direct or intimate experience with jail or prison. Okay, they don't know many people that have. They haven't themselves usually. And as a consequence, they're kind of debilitated in perspective in some way that I would like to help with. They end up getting to hold on to these lies that we tell ourselves about what people in prison must be like, or who they really are, or what they deserve or what they don't deserve. They have this impression of what that world is. And I think that impression, in a way, it's self-flattering, because it makes you feel like, oh, I'm so good, I never went to prison because I'm better than them. And it's nice to be able to get over those delusions, so you're more compassionate towards others. But also objectively, it just tends to not be very true. So I feel like people in that class who might be interested in learning more about what it's really like in our judicial system, in our prisons and county jails, that they'd be able to follow my journey a little more than they would be able to follow somebody who they didn't identify with. And so I wanted to facilitate that, because I think it'll bridge the gap between different perspectives.
And this is your new book, correct?
Yep, it's called Moonrock Mare Crisium.
Is this something that's coming out in 2018, or is this a little bit further out?
Coming out in 1 to 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you weren't kidding when you messaged back and said that it was getting ready. Okay. That's wild. That's really cool. So
just to make sure it actually came back correct and there weren't any major issues.
Well, perfect. Is there is it going to be on Amazon?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'll make sure to send a link out for everybody once it comes out. Well, awesome. I'm going to kind of shift a little bit more towards the entrepreneurial side, just since my audience is mostly people that are small business owners. Is there any advice that you can give, since you're, at least from my objective perspective, kind of a free spirit, somebody who just, you have a passion in life about something you want to go after and just get it done? How do you utilize entrepreneurship to basically pay the bills, but still go after the passions that you're excited about?
That's a difficult one to answer. I remember seeing somebody give a talk saying, if someone gets up and says, go for your passions, that just means that they're already rich. Right? And I thought it was funny for him to make that point, but it probably is a good advice for the average person. But I've always been somebody so far that's kind of, I never knew how to secure the money first, but it wasn't, ever since prison, I wasn't willing to convince myself that I needed to do that first. I needed to go after the passion, because in the end, whether you like what you're doing is more important than whether you like how much money you have, right? And it turns out that if you do what you like, eventually it will lead to something. And I know I want to give enough room to give credit for all the people who are in situations where they just can't afford to stretch themselves out like that because they have responsibilities and commitments and so on. And I totally get that. But there might be things that you like that you haven't tried. right? Things that you can actually explore in a passionate way that don't contradict your current commitments. I just put a little voice out for stay open to exploring those, because if your life becomes just routine, then you're going to die inside. If you're anything like me at all, I mean, routine is there for lots of reasons, and building your own routine is a very good practice if you're doing it on purpose. But if you ever end up feeling like I can describe my life as a routine, it's not that exciting, right? You want challenge, you need challenge, you need a little bit of threat in your life to make you rethink things or try things or just feel alive. And that can be just in your relationships, which maybe that's the most important part, or it could be in the endeavors you're undertaking that are attached to whether or not you're going to have financial security.
That's actually really good advice. I like that. Well, then, like I said, I'm going to respect your time. I'm going to ask the last question I ask of everybody that's on the show. And I know you kind of already hinted on it with your new book coming out, but if there's anything else that's on your heart or on your mind right now, or even the same thing that you'd like people to know about, this can be about you or any other topic or a specific person.
Okay, there's something that's been rattling around for me. Maybe this is related to what you're asking. I looked out in the world, and my whole life, I always saw how I wasn't enough compared to things I would see, right? So you'd look around in a crowd, and you'd find the people who were more attractive, and you'd find the people who had more money. You find the people who had more confidence. You find the people that had more education. It's easy to find all these attributes. And funny, it wasn't always a single person who had all those, but you would find all of them and compare them to yourself. And somehow you weren't now enough, right? And everyone else, you look at all these people, they're well-dressed. You're like, wow, how do they afford all this all the time? They have nice cars. Everyone has all this nice stuff. And you're thinking, man, I have such a hard time getting by just to have the stuff I have. And you fail completely to see that everyone else is looking out in the same crowd, which now includes you, and is thinking the same thing, right? They're wondering, how does that guy get to manage all this stuff? How come he can keep doing all these things? How come he can afford to go on vacations? They don't know the story, but they just compare it to theirs. Okay, for me, it's an analogy of emotion. I think we're all moving through the world in a way, looking for recognition, to feel a sense of purpose, to feel a sense that our creative efforts are valued by something or someone, right? That we made a difference that mattered. And as we search to feel this way, as we search to have that experience, we're desperately looking for validation to come from the exterior world, right? To recognize our efforts, to recognize our talents, or to even motivate us to get started. And we want that. Everybody wants that. So everything we do is to try to earn that. Sometimes we'll work for 10 years to try to earn one compliment from a boss, right? So we really work for these things. It's the currency that every other currency is trying to mimic. And yet, it hasn't really been figured out, as far as I can tell, that it's the one currency you can give away honestly for free without losing your position. In fact, you only gain your position. So if we can afford just a couple times a week, and if you're even better, a couple times a day, to step out of this desperate need for people to validate you, and remember that everybody else has that same desperate need, and just honestly validate them. I'm not saying find a way to flatter them. I'm saying find something to appreciate that you actually do appreciate, and just tell them, right? Not because you want a date from them, not because you're trying to get something, just practice appreciating other people so you can turn the model around. Because if people started actively giving the validation that we're all spending our entire lives trying to get, if it started coming, how much more could we all do? So that's the thought for me, is like, we can actually turn this whole model around by interacting differently. And we can all start today, and we can all give a little bit of genuine validation. Be very careful not to exaggerate, right? Don't give false validation. But there's lots of things we appreciate even about strangers that we're not allowed to say, because that's just what we do, right? That's just the practice we're all in. I think we should start doing it.
You just kind of blew my mind there for a minute. I'm going to take some time and go digest that, because that's some of the best advice I think I've ever heard. Wow, Thad. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. You are definitely an incredible person. I'm glad that we connected. I don't know how it happened, but I'm just glad it happened. And I really appreciate you and your time. Thank you so much, guys. For those of you that have watched live, for those of you that have watched the replay, please, the link's down below. Feel free to go follow Thad on Facebook. His adventures are a ton of fun to watch. Please go check his book out. The link is down there as well as his website to read up more on some physics and all the theories that he has. It's awesome. But Thad, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the show?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. See y'all.